Hello everyone, this is Goosebumps Godzilla, and today I'm going to be talking about the third Goosebumps book in Goosebumps Series 2000, and that is Creature Teacher. So I did a previous take before, and it was like 27 minutes long, so I'm going to try to shorten this up, but also, real fast, I just want to say I'm really sorry about not uploading for a couple of months, or, making videos for a couple of months and stuff like that. Really kind of my bad. I'm really sorry about that. Just been busy and just haven't felt like it and stuff like that. But yeah, anyways, so today I'm going to be talking about, again, the third Goosebumps book in Goosebumps Series 2000, Creature Teacher. And basically how the main antagonist of that book is actually an actor for a movie similar to Fright Camp. So yeah, before we continue, spoiler warning though, for a couple of Goosebumps books, specifically the girl who cried, not the girl who cried monster, Creature Teacher, major spoilers for that one. Medium-sized spoilers, I would say, for the sequel, Creature Teacher: The Final Exam from Goosebumps Most Wanted. And then there's going to be some, I don't know, medium to minor spoilers for the Goosebumps book Fright Camp. I'll try to be very loose on the spoilers for Fright Camp, mainly due to the fact that, you know, uh, it's kind of not as well known as the other ones, so I'm sure more people haven't read that one compared to Creature Teacher, Creature Teacher's Final Exam. Anyway, so yeah. Also, apologies in advance if this video is not the best. Well, obviously, well, I don't know, but I just I'm gonna be a little rusty this video, kind of getting back into the whole theory thing and everything. So yeah. Anyway, so let's get started. I'm gonna try to make this one shorter again than my previous take, which was again like 30 minutes long. So, anyways, guys, let's get into this theory. So, pretty much, Mrs. Marr, in case you don't remember, don't really know that well, or ignored the spoiler warning, basically is this monster, and she essentially goes to these places where she serves as kind of a teacher, as you can tell from the title of the book. Anyways, she goes there and essentially has this chart. Who's ever at the top of the chart does the best in activities in the camp or in the school, has the best grades or whatever. Then the person at the bottom of the chart is the ones that fail in the activities or has the worst grades, depending on if it's the original Creature Teacher book, which takes place in a school, or it's the sequel that takes place in a camp. Anyways, so in the first Creature Teacher book, she serves as a headmistress, and I think that's the name of her position, and a teacher in this boarding school called the Private Academy. So our main protagonist of this book moves over to this school because he's kind of not doing too well in public school. He got his teacher angry. She's giving him all these bad grades just because she doesn't like the kid, main protagonist. So anyway, he moves to this boarding school called the Caring Academy, and essentially there, he meets Mrs. R, his teacher. And so essentially, again, as I said before, she's a monster, she has a chart and everything like that. So obviously the main protagonist is concerned, along with everyone else in that class. Everyone else in that class, tries to do really well and everything, but they have attempted before to tell other people around the school about Mrs. Marr, but no one actually believes them except for the kids at the school. Like, all the kids at the school believe she's a monster, but none of the adults at all actually think she's a monster. Which is kind of strange given the fact that she actually does not appear in a human form throughout the entire book. Also, in her sequel, same thing. She never appears in human form. But anyways, main protagonist obviously keeps trying to do well, everything like that. He meets Mrs. Marr's son, Marv, who we couldn't even tell was Mrs. Marr's son until later on into the book when someone told him. But he essentially is this kid that no one really talks to due to all the kids in the school thinking that Miss Marr is a monster, which she is. Anyway, so main protagonist trying to do well, but someone keeps sabotaging all the stuff that he's trying to do. Like, he tried to make a model of a molecule, but it got sabotaged. And so main protagonist thinks it's Marv, but it actually turns out to be his classmate. At one point, he does try to run away from the school, but someone actually, the kid who sabotaged his stuff, actually came in and stopped him. And anyways, he tries to tell his parents. Didn't work at all either. Anyway, one thing leads to another. He lands on the bottom of the chart at the end of the school year. So there he's basically confronted by Mrs. Marr and is about to be eaten when Marv comes in and tells him Mrs. Marr's weakness. And that is the fact that if she laughs, she'll basically go dormant for 6 months. And so, anyways, the main protagonist manages to do this, and she goes to sleep for supposedly like 6 months or whatever. So, anyways, in the sequel, she basically, without giving too much away, she goes to this camp where she essentially takes over. There's this head counselor, but she essentially goes to this island, essentially takes over the island. This camp called Winter Island, which basically turns losers there who get sent there into winners. Anyways, so she's basically now a teacher at that camp and is essentially taking it over. Anyways, so our main protagonist gets sent there to Winter Island by his parents, and there he meets Mrs. Marr, and the whole chart thing is very similar to the plot of the first book, but in a different atmosphere. I kind of prefer the second book as a whole to the first one, but they're both really, really great. Anyways, so at the end of the book, though, instead of making her laugh, and also Marv actually does not appear in that book, which is one thing that's kind of strange. Anyways, so eventually, at the end of the book, he lands on the bottom of the chart, and he actually defeats her by using a highly spicy spray, or like something like that. I can't really remember what it is. It's just spicy stuff that his parents got him, and he manages to basically get Mrs. Marr to run off the island, like swim off the island. And so, yeah. Anyways, at the end of the book, though, there's actually another monster that appears, very similar to Mrs. Marr, but she has, or I'm not sure if it's he or she, I can't remember, but essentially it has 2 heads. Anyways, so that is, without giving too much away, the plot for the first and second Creature Teacher book. Anyways, so yeah. It seems like, as a whole, that Mrs. Marr is, just a monster. She likes to eat kids once every year, She just seems like a monster. But there's actually some evidence to contradict this. And the first and biggest piece of evidence I have, personally, is her multi-year at Winter Island. So, unlike the original Creature Teacher book, it was her first year as teacher there in the Caring Academy. And her position there doesn't really make that much sense, I figured since it's like, a school, they have to do some personal background research. She actually has to have some, like, I don't know, it's not qualities, but it's, I can't remember the exact word, but she actually has to have, like a resume to actually get signed on as, like, headmistress or teacher of this school. And so it's kind of strange how, like, she got hired to headmistress and teacher of the Caring Academy and stuff like that, especially since this is a privately owned school and everything. Anyway, so there is that, as well as the fact that in the book, all the children in the school, because all the children in school, none of them socialized with Marv. The only one who ever did was the main protagonist of the book. That's why Marv came to save him in the end. And so, so it seems like, since no one else talked to Marv, and he seems like a fairly nice person throughout the entire book, talks to Marv, it seems like every single child in that school knows who Mrs. Marr is. And so, if that's the case, then how come, like, no one is bothered by the fact that, like, the counselors and stuff like that aren't bothered by it? So, all the children in her class have tried to tell, the other workers there that she's a monster. None of them believe them, even though the fact that she does not appear in human form. She does say that she has, like, deformities, or that's, like, her cover-up, basically. But, like, still, she's a monster. You can look at her chart. You can essentially spy on her, and she will be eating, like, rats. That's actually one of the scenes in the book. And, like, it just doesn't really make that much sense how, like, no one actually in the school is concerned by the fact that she's actually a monster. But anyways, that wasn't my first big piece of evidence, since, maybe she could get away with the, you know, eating of the child. She did try to come up with cover-up for the fact of the child's disappearance. Of course, the main protagonist survived in the end, but, she should try to come up with a cover-up and stuff like that. But still, everyone in the school, or all the children in the school, could just easily point fingers at her and say she's responsible, whatever. So it just doesn't really make sense, her plan for being at that school, and the whole not weight chart, but the chart that she has to mark off who she's going to eat at the end of the year. But anyway, so yeah, but the first big piece of evidence that I was talking about before was actually in the sequel, because unlike in the first one, she spent multiple years there at the camp. First off, she came in and invaded the island. And even if she's not a monster, she still could, face legal charges for her being there on the island, just, like, taking it over without her ever being hired. Because that's the origin story they basically gave her for how she got on the island in the book. And again, this is multiple year. Everyone at the camp knows she's a monster. The counselor knows she's a monster. And refuses to call the authorities for some weird reason. And it's not like she could come up with a cover-up, because she is stuck on an island. So, like, how does she explain when a camper goes disappearing and stuff like that? It just really doesn't make that much sense, her whole big plan for being on that island. And then, of course, there's a bunch of minor pieces of evidence, like the fact that she does not behave like any other monster found in the Goosebumps books. I spent a long time talking about this in the previous take, so I'll try to skim this down. But essentially, she does not share the same weaknesses as other Goosebumps monsters, with them laughing plenty of times, not going into a 6-month dormancy, basically. And then there's the fact that her son looks exactly like a human, despite being 12. That doesn't really make that much sense, due to the fact that majority of the monsters in the Goosebumps books, when they turn 12, that's when they become into their monster form. It's also the fact that she does not transform from human to monster, but she stays a monster the entire time in the books. And, there's just stuff like that. And also, none of the monsters that I've seen in Goosebumps universe actually wants to eat kids or do anything evil like that. And she's also not concerned about showing off her identity as a monster. They're telling, again, like, almost the entire school in the first one, and all of the campers and camp counselors in the sequel, that she's a monster, and she doesn't really seem to care. Which, is unlike any of the monsters seen in the book. Like, they threatened to, you can see this in Lizard of Oz, How I Met My Monster, as well as, what's it called? The Girl Who Cried Monster, along with several similar books to that. So it just doesn't really make that much sense as a whole. And also, another minor piece of evidence is the fact that in the Goosebumps film, Slappy actually is aware of Mrs. Marr's existence. And, because he references her in Slappy's Revenge. You could say, though, maybe, Mrs. Creature Teacher does not exist in the Goosebumps books, because, they couldn't release all the Goosebumps monsters ever in the Goosebumps film. But it just seems kind of odd that none of the monsters in the Goosebumps film, or not none of them, but for Mrs. Marr to not be released. Her manuscript is seen specifically in the Goosebumps film, as well as, again, Slappy referencing her in Slappy's Revenge. So why wouldn't Slappy release Mrs. Marr into, his attack in the movie? It just really doesn't make that much sense, especially since he released Murder the Clown, who essentially is, just a clown, in no matter which version you're talking about, the Jonathan Schiller version or the Nightmare on Clown Street version. Both of them are just humans. They can't really, do much. So it seems weird for him to release Murder the Clown, but not release Mrs. Marr, who would most likely be more dangerous and more powerful, but still he could control Mrs. Marr. Due to her being, weaker than Slappy. And so, yeah. those are all some like piece events I see that disprove the fact that entirely she is a monster. You could say though that in Goosebumps Horror Town there is a version of Mrs. Marr that basically is actually a monster. You can pretty much confirm that with her transforming like into a monster visibly in the game. But she holds very, very little similarities to the actual Ms. Marr seen in the books. First off, she actually likes kids, likes to be around kids, likes to teach kids. She doesn't have the chart thing. Um, she essentially eats insects, like in the game, I think, and like she just acts completely different. Plus, she actually has human form and a monster form, which she exchanges through freely. So again, it doesn't really make that much sense for her, for the one seen in the book and the one seen in the Horror Town thing to be similar. And especially since she's completely different from any other monster seen in the books, and she's very similar to a bunch of the Goosebumps monsters in Goosebumps Horror Town. Anyway, so I think that kind of disproves the fact that she is a monster, and so it's time to get into the two separate theories on the explanation for who she is if she's not a monster. And so, yeah, of course, if she's not a monster, then who is she? So I think I have two theories. First one doesn't make much sense at all, but I still think it's kind of a cool theory. And that is that Mrs. Marr's actually a normal teacher. Like, she's a human, but she's dressed up in a monster costume to try to get her students to get better grades. It doesn't really make that much sense because it's kind of over the top. I don't think the school would allow that to happen. But it would explain several things, like how Marv is still in his human form, or is human, and she is a monster. There's also the fact how, she shares very little similarities to any other Goosebumps monster if she's just a fake monster. But the issues with that is there's no real evidence to prove it. Plus, in one scene in the book, she eats a rat. I highly doubt a teacher with a modest budget would be able to do that. Plus, why would she be on Winter Island if she's a full-time teacher and she actually enjoys to teach kids? Why would she be on Winter Island and take it over and everything like that? Unless, it kind of... She can, if she wants to, move to Winter Island and stuff like that, but I don't know. Even if she did go to Winter Island, in one scene in Creature Teacher the Final Exam, the main protagonist actually tried to tear off the mask or try to see if Mrs. Marr was actually just a person in a mask. And he failed to do so with, incredibly realistic results to prove it seems like that she's a monster. I've already kind of disproved that she's a monster, kind of. And so, yeah, and then there's the fact that Marv is not in the sequel. It doesn't really make that much sense if that actually is her son. And again, she's got a small budget here. She can't build this, realistic monster costume. So, it doesn't really that. It's a cool theory at first, but it just doesn't really make that much sense at the end of the day. Okay, so here's the final theory in the thing, and that is that she is actually an actor for a movie. And it's most likely being directed by a director named R.B. Faraday, or in a similar fashion. Because, just in case you don't know or don't remember, R.B. Faraday is, in the Goosebumps universe, a popular horror film director. And he, essentially, in the book, opened up this camp for, fans of his book, or his movies. And so the main characters of that book can't wait to come, they go there, and a bunch of creepy stuff starts going on. Like, there's this realistic, robot water zombie kind of thing that, has his brother's face on it, the main protagonist's brother's face on it. And all these, hyper-realistic stuff keeps going on, like his bunkmate gets, electrocuted, it seems like. His parents, on visitation day, or his mom, I know for sure, basically gets drowned in quicksand, and all this strange stuff keeps going on, and, that makes him think, that the whole camp is, some evil thing going on. But essentially, it turns out it was all, a prank basically made by the film director, because there's video cameras all around that camp, and he essentially films all the people there and their horrifying experiences, basically makes it into a movie he's making to get real scares and stuff like that. And so that is pretty much RB Faraday. A bunch of people in that camp were actually actors the whole time and stuff like that. So yeah, and I think this would be a similar situation in Creature Teacher and Creature Teacher the Final Exam. That would kind of explain the transition between Teacher and going to Winter Island if it's just a sequel to a movie and stuff like that. Also, it explains why no one is bothered, like the authorities or anyone is actually bothered. It explains how a bunch of people were actually actors. Also, kind of explains why the girl in the book actually kept the main protagonist from running away. She was actually the one, as I said before, who was sabotaging all the projects and stuff like that. But she actually, I don't think, was at the bottom of the list by the end of the school year due to, I think, sabotaging someone else's violin and stuff like that. So, why would she keep the main protagonist from running away from the building? After all, I mean, he's not that far from civilization. He can literally just walk down the road and he'll eventually find a town in, like, less than a day, like a couple of hours at the most. And so, yeah, kind of find that as a adding piece of evidence, the fact that she kept him from running away when he very much could have, and she would have still been the better for it, or she would have been better for it and stuff like that. She basically tricked him into saying that there was invisible fences, but there wasn't, obviously. So yeah. Another piece of evidence I have for that is that, as I said before, in Fright Camp, there's video cameras all over the place. Well, there's a bunch of video cameras in schools, obviously, because it's a school, but also in Creature Teacher Book 2, the Final Exam, or Creature Teacher's Final Exam, there are specifically noted video cameras all throughout this camp, where they spy on kids and stuff like that. So that is another massive piece of evidence to prove it, because, they're very similar in that key aspect. It explains all the plot holes with the monsters and stuff like that. Again, very similar to Fright Camp, especially the sequel. And then it also explains how in the end of Creature Teacher Final Exam, there is a second monster. Because, Mrs. Marghhhhh, she invades this island. Why not? No one calls it the authorities. No one's concerned that these children are disappearing and she's not getting caught or anything like that. Especially since she can't come up with an alibi for the student because she's trapped on an island. Anyways, so, okay, putting all that stuff aside, she runs away from the island, but then, suddenly, in the end of the book, a second monster comes in, which doesn't really make much sense either, because, okay, Mrs. Marr leaves, fine, but then, where'd the second monster come from? The camp counselor, obviously, does not want monsters on this island, but for some weird reason, all these monsters come into the island, and it doesn't really make that much sense, unless it's a movie. So, yeah, it also explains why Slappy would never release Mrs. Marr despite referencing her, because she's actually just an actor, person. But anyways, guys, that's our theory for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Still a bit longer than I anticipated or wanted to, but I hope you guys enjoy this video. And if you do, I don't know, just thanks for watching, everyone. And so, yeah. That's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, apologies for not uploading as consistently this year, like with 5 videos for all of 2022. Hoping to change that, at least get to, 20 videos this year. Probably not going to happen, but, we'll see what happens. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and that is the end of the video.